Most people still misunderstand what MGTOW actually exposed. They think it was about hatred, bitterness, weak men running from responsibility, a digital cult of wounded egos trying to punish the world because they couldn't control it. But that was never the real danger. The real danger was that it forced people to look directly at something modern culture spends enormous energy trying to avoid, the collapse of meaning inside modern masculinity. Because beneath all the anger, all the noise, all the arguments, there was a question nobody wanted to answer. What happens to a man when the role he was taught to pursue no longer guarantees purpose, respect, stability, or identity? That question terrified people. Not because it was false. Because too many men quietly recognized themselves inside it. And maybe you do too. Not in the extreme versions. Not in the internet caricatures. But in the silent exhaustion. The emotional detachment. The creeping realization that you've spent years chasing validation without ever deciding who you actually are. That is the part nobody talks about. Because modern men are trained to optimize performance before they understand purpose. You are taught how to compete before you are taught how to think. How to attract before how to stand alone. How to signal value before how to build character. And eventually, if you follow that path long enough, something fractures inside you. You become efficient, but hollow. Connected, but replaceable. Visible, but unknown even to yourself. That is the psychological landscape movements like MGTOW emerged from. Not strength. Not wisdom. But disillusionment. And disillusionment is dangerous because it feels like awakening while quietly turning into paralysis. That is the first thing you need to understand. Disillusionment is not transformation. A man who sees corruption everywhere but never builds himself becomes trapped in permanent reaction. He mistakes observation for evolution. And that is exactly where most people fail. They discover uncomfortable truths about relationships, status, society, power dynamics, human nature, and instead of becoming more disciplined, more conscious, more sovereign, they become cynical. Cynicism is what happens when intelligence loses courage. It is easier to reject the game than to master yourself within it. Easier to detach emotionally than risk disappointment. Easier to say nothing matters than to build something meaningful anyway. Most people never notice when this shift happens because cynicism disguises itself as wisdom. But wisdom builds. Cynicism only decays. You can hear it in the language. Why bother? Everyone is fake. Nothing is real. It's all manipulation. No. Not everything is manipulation. Some things are simply consequences. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you stop viewing yourself as a victim of the modern world, you are forced to confront a far more uncomfortable reality. You are responsible for what your mind becomes in response to it. That is where the real battle begins. Not outside you. Inside you. Most men today are psychologically fragmented because they were raised inside contradiction. They were told to be soft, but respected only when strong. Told to express emotion, but punished when emotionally unstable. Told achievement doesn't define them, while society measures them almost entirely through performance. So they drift. They shape-shift depending on the room. One personality at work. Another online. Another in relationships. Another alone at night staring at the ceiling wondering why nothing feels solid anymore. This is what happens when a man has no internal architecture. He becomes emotionally weather-dependent. Every opinion changes him. Every rejection destabilizes him. Every failure becomes existential. But self-aware men understand something most people never learn: identity cannot be outsourced. Not to relationships. Not to status. Not to ideology. Not to the approval of strangers online. If your entire sense of worth collapses when external validation disappears, then you never possessed self-respect. You possess dependency wearing confidence as a costume. That realization hurts. But it is liberating too. Because once you see it clearly, you stop trying to be chosen by everyone and start becoming accountable to yourself. That changes your posture toward life completely. Now you stop asking, "How do I get people to value me?" and begin asking, "What kind of man would deserve his own respect even in isolation?" That is a different path entirely. And it requires something modern culture rarely rewards: voluntary responsibility. Not performative masculinity. Not aggression. Not emotional shutdown. Responsibility. The ability to carry your mind without collapsing into impulse, resentment, or self-pity. Most people avoid responsibility because responsibility removes fantasy. Fantasy says your life would improve if society changed. Responsibility asks what you are doing with the reality that already exists. Fantasy obsesses over fairness. Responsibility obsesses over capability. And capability changes everything. Because reality responds to competence far more than emotion. A disciplined man understands this deeply. He stops wasting years trying to emotionally negotiate with reality. Reality does not care how unfair something feels. It responds to preparation. Skill. Composure. Adaptation. Most men stay mentally adolescent because they never accept this. They continue waiting for the world to become emotionally comfortable before taking ownership of themselves. But comfort is not what builds self-respect. Pressure does. Look at nature carefully. Steel is forged through heat. Muscle grows through resistance. Architecture survives through structural tension. Everything durable is shaped through pressure properly carried. Human beings are no different. The question is not whether life pressures you. The question is whether pressure refines you, or corrodes you. And that depends entirely on your internal discipline. This is where many men took the wrong lesson from modern disillusionment. They withdrew from relationships, ambition, vulnerability, or responsibility itself, believing detachment was freedom. But isolation is not mastery. A man hiding from disappointment is not free. He is avoiding exposure. Real strength is not emotional numbness. It is emotional regulation. The ability to remain grounded without becoming cold. Open without becoming naive. Disciplined without becoming rigid. That balance is rare because it requires self-awareness instead of performance. Most people perform identities. Very few examine themselves honestly. That examination is brutal because eventually you realize many of your choices were never truly yours. The real solution was never blind rebellion against society. And it was never passive withdrawal either. The solution is sovereignty. A calm, disciplined relationship with reality itself. The ability to see the flaws of modern culture without becoming consumed by bitterness. To understand human nature without losing your humanity. To accept painful truths without building your identity around resentment. That is maturity. And it is increasingly rare. Because resentment feels powerful temporarily, but it quietly destroys agency. Every second you spend obsessing over what is broken is a second not spent building yourself into someone difficult to break. So choose carefully. Most people will continue drifting between distraction and resentment for the rest of their lives. But you do not have to. You can become deliberate. Grounded. Capable. Clear. Not perfect. Just conscious. And in this era, that alone makes you dangerous.